Hey everybody! I got a bunch of questions from my last video when I talked about how we had moved into the camper and we were really enjoying it, and I'd like to address those now, quickly, to honor your time, and we're just going to jump right in. Some of the questions I had were, is it cheaper than rent to live in a camper? And the short answer for us is yes, but it probably won't be for everybody. We still pay rent. So the question is actually, is it cheaper than renting an apartment or a house? And for us, yes, and that's mostly because of the area that we live in. We live close to wilderness areas and ski resorts, and real estate is just expensive close to those things, but that's where my job is right now. And Curtis works in Salt Lake City, so we kind of needed a place that was halfway between the two that wouldn't break the bank. And we pay $330 a month for rent, $120 for wastewater, and like $120 for fuel. Probably more than that for fuel. But it comes down to like $600 or less each month for us to live where we are, and that's for two people. But if we wanted to rent, say, in Park City, we would probably pay that each for an apartment in Park City. And even in a lot of places in Salt Lake, we would pay about that much. So it was cheaper for us to do what we're doing. And if you add in the cost of our camper, if we spread it out over like 8 months we're going to be paying rent, it would still be less than paying rent at an apartment in Park City. So for us it was cheaper. But wherever you are in your area, you need to do the math, sit down, and make the numbers work for you and the amount of people that you're going to be living with. Like, one of my friends asked, thanks Ben for your comment, if he and his friends who are doing summer sales could just get a camper and live out of it. But like, if you're in the Midwest and rent is really cheap, it's probably better just to get an apartment close to where you work instead of buying a camper and then having to tow it back at the end of the summer. And I would definitely not recommend borrowing money to get a camper. I don't think it's worth it to borrow money for things that you're basically going to destroy, like cars and toys. We don't do that, and I wouldn't recommend it. Other friends asked for like tips about moving into a camper and like resources they could look to, things they could read or watch to explain more about it and kind of like prepare you mentally for the experience. And I would say that there wasn't anything like directly related to living in a camper that we looked at, but over the years we kind of laid this groundwork of simplifying our life, so I'll tell you about that. I would recommend the following books and resources to prepare you for living in a small space, living more simply, and having like a future goal, because you probably don't want to live in a camper forever. Maybe you do, we don't. It's just like a means to an end and a fun experience, and we're young and we don't have kids, and I know there are people that do it with kids and they're fine, but this is just a good time in our life to experiment with this kind of living. So, to do with money, I would recommend the following books to help you get your finances lined up and get all your ducks in a row. I would recommend reading The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey, which is just his book and the financial principles that he recommends you should live by, including being debt-free, having an emergency savings to cover your income in case you lose your job or become disabled or something. And we got a copy of that book for our wedding 7.5 years ago from a sibling, and we read it, and we thought this is probably good advice. It was 2010, so the economy was pretty bad. It was just a couple years after the housing bubble popped, and we just witnessed the devastation that had, mostly psychologically, on friends and family members, and we knew that we didn't want to go through that. And so not having debt was important to us, and it discouraged us from buying a house at that time. I would also recommend reading The Richest Man in Babylon, which is like kind of like a little story about people anciently that go through kind of these same financial principles. The most important one that we gleaned from that was to pay yourself first. Take out 15, 20%, whatever you want to do, and immediately put that in savings so that it will come back to you someday. That way you never spend more than you earn, I guess. Like, you'll always have that 20% like growing for you in the background, so that when you later become unable to work or want to have an option not to work but do other things, you can. But in the meantime, you can still provide for everyday expenses, so you can live. I would also recommend listening to Jordan Page on Fun, Cheaper, Free. That's her YouTube channel. She's a mom of 6, and she and her husband are entrepreneurs.